I never thought I'd be stuck sharing a hotel room with a guy I first just met, let alone in a city I barely knew, with only one bed between us. But here we were, me and this stranger named Matt, awkwardly trying to figure out how to not make the night more uncomfortable than it already was. Spoiler, it did not go as smoothly as I hoped. Okay, let me back up a bit, because this whole situation started out pretty normal. I was flying from New York to Chicago for a work thing. Nothing fancy, just a couple of days of meetings, and maybe one night of exploring the city if I had time. I'm not the type to get too excited about airports or planes, but I do appreciate a smooth trip. That was until our plane got diverted. We were about an hour out from O'Hare when the pilot suddenly announced some technical issue with the runway we were supposed to land on, and that we'd be diverted to Milwaukee instead. Milwaukee. Not exactly the ideal place when you have meetings scheduled for the morning and no rental car. Everyone on the plane groaned, and honestly, I felt the frustration hitting me in waves like the turbulence we'd just been flying through. I pulled out my phone, trying to reschedule rides, but the airport Wi-Fi was barely working. That's when I noticed the guy sitting next to me, Matt. We'd exchanged a few polite nods before we took off, but now that we were grounded somewhere completely unexpected, he looked just as stranded as I felt. Matt's the kind of guy you'd notice in a crowd, not because he was flashy, but because there was something easy about him. He had this calm energy, like he wasn't stressed about the delay at all. He was scrolling through his phone, chuckling at something. I figured maybe he was on a trip like me, but for fun. I learned he was a photographer traveling to Chicago for a gallery opening. We both ended up at the same shuttle bus that took us from Milwaukee Airport to a hotel about 20 minutes away. Here's where things started to get interesting. The hotel was clearly dealing with a surge of diverted passengers, and after waiting in a line that moved at a snail's pace, the receptionist finally told us they only had one room left. One room. One bed. I'll admit, my mind immediately went to the worst-case scenarios: awkward small talk, uncomfortable attempts at privacy, and trying not to make things weird. Matt just smiled and said, "Well, looks like we're roommates for the night." His voice was easygoing, like he wasn't bothered at all by the situation. We took the elevator up, each carrying our bags, neither of us quite sure how the night was going to play out. The room was modest, nothing fancy, but clean enough, with a large bed and not much else in terms of options. We both stood there for a second, sizing up the situation, trying to decide who would take what side of the bed, or if we'd try to turn the chairs into some kind of makeshift sleeping setup. But honestly, we were both too exhausted to put much thought into it. That's when Matt said something that broke the tension. He looked at me with this half smile and said, "You know, this might turn out to be a pretty interesting story someday." At that moment, I didn't know if I would be laughing about it later or wishing I'd booked a different flight altogether. So here I am, stuck in a hotel room with a guy the first barely know, sharing one bed in a city neither of us planned to be in. And honestly, I have no idea what's going to happen next. But I guess that's what makes it worth telling. Matt's comment hung in the air for a moment, and I found myself smiling despite the ridiculousness of the whole situation. "Yeah," I said, "I guess, though I'm not sure if future me will thank past me for this." He laughed softly, the kind of laugh that's low and genuine, not the forced chuckle people make when they're trying to be polite. It made me relax a little, and I realized how tired I actually was. Between the flight delays and the sudden diversion, I hadn't had a decent break all day. So, Matt said, dropping his bag by the door, "What's your story? Business, fun, or misadventure like me?" I exhaled, sinking down onto the edge of the bed. "Business. I'm here for some meetings, mostly trying not to mess them up. And you?" "A gallery opening. Chicago's been on my list for a while now. Thought it'd be a nice change of pace from the usual gigs." I nodded. That sounds way more interesting than staring at spreadsheets and nodding at suits all day. Yeah, but if the gallery people don't like my stuff, it's not exactly a dream come true either. He turned his phone over in his hands, a flash of vulnerability crossing his face for the briefest second. I caught it right away. "Hey, if you made it this far, you're doing better than most of us. Plus, you're here now, so that counts." He looked up and smiled, a little softer this time. "Thanks, man. That means a lot." We fell into a comfortable silence for a bit, and I realized how strange it was that I'd just spent a good chunk of the day feeling stressed and on edge, and now, here I was, talking to this guy who felt like an old friend already. The room felt small, sure, but not in a bad way. There was something about sharing this unplanned moment with someone who just got it. I looked over at the bed, the big, inviting mattress that we'd both have to share. Neither of us made a move toward it. So Matt said, breaking the quiet again, "How do we do this? One bed, two people. Got any strategies?" I laughed, finally standing up to pace around. "Honestly, I was thinking about pretending I'm dead and hoping you don't notice." He shook his head and grinned. "Yeah, that won't work for long." We both glanced at the bed again, and I could feel the awkwardness creeping back in. But then Matt surprised me. He said, "Look, we don't have to sleep right next to each other. I mean, we can each take one side, keep some space." I nodded, appreciating the straightforwardness. "Yeah, that works. We're adults. We can keep it professional." He raised his eyebrows. Professional roommates who are unwillingly sharing a bed in a hotel. Sounds like the title of a bad indie movie. I snorted. I'd watch that. As we settled in for the night, I noticed how easy it was to talk to him. We swapped stories about our travels, embarrassing moments at work, and favorite places we'd visited. There was something about the randomness of the night that made those conversations feel more real, more honest. At one point, Matt pulled out his phone and showed me some of his photography. The pictures were incredible, raw and emotional, not the usual polished stuff you see in galleries. I was genuinely impressed. "You've got talent," I said. He shrugged like it was no big deal. "I'm working on it." It's a tough world out there. We finally climbed into bed, each choosing a side. I was half expecting to feel awkward or tense, but instead, there was a strange sense of calm. The exhaustion won out over anything else. Before I drifted off, I heard Matt's voice again, softer this time. "Thanks for being cool about this." I smiled in the dark. "Well, what else are you going to do when you're stuck in a room with a stranger? Might as well make the best of it." And just like that, I realized that sometimes the worst travel mishaps lead to the most unexpected connections. I had no idea what the next day would bring, but for the first time in a while, I was actually looking forward to finding out. Morning came way too fast, and I woke up with a crick in my neck from trying not to invade Matt's half of the bed. It was weirdly intimate, sharing that space, even if we were both half asleep and doing our best to ignore the obvious closeness. I glanced over, and Matt was still out cold, sprawled diagonally with his arm hanging off the edge. Seeing him like that, unbothered and peaceful, made me realize how little I even knew about this guy beyond the basics. I decided to get up quietly so I wouldn't wake him. I grabbed my phone and checked the time. It was early, too early for the meetings I had later, but I figured it was a good chance to explore a bit before the chaos started. Matt stirred as I moved toward the bathroom. "Morning," he mumbled, voice groggy but warm. "Morning," I replied, trying not to sound like a zombie. "Don't mean to be that guy, but I'm gonna grab some coffee downstairs." He sat up, rubbing his eyes. "Yeah, same. I could use a caffeine shot. We're in Chicago after all. We should at least do coffee right." I laughed at that. "True. You want to meet back here in, say, 30 minutes? Sounds like a plan." Down in the lobby, the place was surprisingly quiet for a hotel that had been packed the night before. The smell of fresh coffee was the best thing I'd smelled in days, and I grabbed 2 cups from the little self-serve station. I didn't want to wake Matt with the smell of coffee brewing, but now that I was up, I was curious. I wasn't even sure how to find a good spot to grab breakfast around here. Chicago isn't exactly Milwaukee. When I got back to the room, Matt was sitting on the bed, scrolling through his phone with a look that told me he was trying to seem awake, but wasn't succeeding. I handed him his coffee. "Here, your caffeine fix." He took it with a grateful smile. "You're a lifesaver." We sat on opposite ends of the bed, sipping quietly. There was this strange comfort in the silence, like we were both soaking in the fact that we'd ended up here together in this weird little bubble. "So," Matt said, breaking the quiet, "what's the plan after your meetings?" I shrugged. "Honestly, didn't think past getting here. Maybe find a decent diner, call it a night. You? Gallery opening tonight, but I'm thinking I might skip it. Cities like this change you when you're not planning on it." I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. There's something about being forced to slow down that makes you notice things you usually miss. The rest of the day flew by in a blur. My meetings were tiring, but went better than I expected, probably because I had this weird energy from the night before. And when the work stuff finally wrapped, I found Matt waiting in the hotel lobby. He looked different somehow, less carefree, more focused. "Want to grab dinner? I know a spot not far from here. Nothing fancy, but good food." I hesitated for half a second before saying yes. Honestly, spending another evening alone after all that felt worse than the awkwardness of sharing a bed. The restaurant was cozy, a little hole in the wall that smelled like garlic and old wood. We grabbed a table by the window and ordered way too much food, laughing over stories of terrible dates and travel disasters. There was a spark in the way we talked, a kind of connection I hadn't felt in a while. At some point, the conversation shifted from lighthearted to more personal. Matt told me about his struggles as an artist, how hard it was to get recognition, how lonely the process could be. I shared a little about the pressure I felt at work, the feeling that I was always playing a role instead of being myself. It was the kind of talk that usually takes a lot longer to build up to, but the night, the city, and the unexpected circumstances seemed to strip away the usual barriers. After dinner, we decided to walk a bit. The cool night air, a welcome change from the stuffy restaurant. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement, making everything feel a little more magical even though it was just an ordinary street. We stopped at a small park bench, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. I looked over at Matt and realized how easy it was to just be around him. No pretense, no awkwardness. "Crazy, huh?" I said finally. "How a delayed plane and one hotel room can lead to this." He smiled, eyes glinting in the streetlight. "Yeah, sometimes life throws you a curveball, and you just have to catch it." I wanted to say more, to tell him how much the night had meant, but the words got stuck. Instead, I just nodded and reached out to brush a stray piece of hair from his forehead, a small, impulsive gesture. Matt caught my hand gently. "Hey," he said softly, "I'm really glad we got stuck together." "Me too," I admitted. The moment stretched out between us, charged with something neither of us had expected when we first boarded that plane. I didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in a long time, I was okay with not knowing. Because sometimes, the best stories start with a little disruption, and maybe a shared bed in a strange city. We ended up walking for a while, just letting the city's nighttime hum wash over us. It was one of those rare moments where everything felt effortlessly right, even though, realistically, it was just two guys who happened to be stranded in a weird situation. I kept stealing glances at Matt. There was something about the way the streetlights hit his face, softening his sharp features, making him look, I don't know, more real than I'd expected. At one point, we found ourselves in front of this tiny jazz bar tucked between two buildings. The muffled sound of a saxophone floated out through the cracked open door. Matt hesitated, then said, "Want to check it out? It's not my usual scene, but I'm tempted." I shrugged, feeling more adventurous than I had all day. "Why not? Seems like the night's full of surprises already." Inside, the bar was dim and smoky, with a handful of people sitting around small tables, nursing drinks and nodding along to the music. We found a couple of empty seats near the stage. The sax player was good. Like, really good. You could tell he was pouring everything he had into every note. The atmosphere was intimate in a way that made me feel like we were part of something just between us. Matt leaned over and whispered, "This is the kind of stuff I wish I had time for more often." "I get that," I smiled. "Sometimes I think I work too much to remember what it's like to just be." We talked less and listened more, letting the music fill in the gaps where words would have felt weird. There was a quiet closeness in that shared silence, one that didn't need explanations or forced conversation. It was just us, the music, and the night. When the set ended, Matt looked at me with that easy grin. "Okay, your turn. What's something about you I wouldn't guess?" I thought for a second, then said, "I have a terrible habit of overthinking everything. Like, I can spend hours replaying a conversation just to figure out if I said the right thing." He laughed softly. "I don't think I'm any better. Sometimes I feel like my mind is a mess of what-ifs." The honesty between us was starting to feel natural, like peeling off layers instead of putting on a show. I found myself wanting to keep this going, to see where it could lead, even if the whole thing had started with a screwed-up flight and a shared bed. After the jazz bar, we walked back toward the hotel, the city quieter now but still alive with late-night energy. When we got inside, the silence hit me differently than it had before. Now that we'd shared more than just a room, the air between us felt charged. Matt stopped by the door and looked at me. "So, tomorrow, we both go back to our lives, right? This is just a weird blip." I nodded slowly, not sure I wanted it to be just a blip. "Yeah, I guess." There was a pause, and then he surprised me by stepping closer. "Honestly, I don't want this to end tonight. My heart skipped." "Neither do I." We stood there for a moment, the weight of what that meant sinking in. I reached out, and this time, it wasn't just a brush of hair. It was a deliberate, gentle touch. Matt leaned into it, and before I knew it, we were kissing. It wasn't perfect or cinematic, just two people who had found something unexpected in the middle of chaos. When we finally pulled apart, breathless, Matt grinned. "Well, that escalated nicely." I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Yeah, who knew a diverted plane would be the best thing to happen to me in a long time? We spent the rest of the night talking in that hotel room, the city's distant noises faint behind the closed windows. We shared stories, hopes, fears, the kind of connection you don't get to have every day. The bed was small, sure, but somehow it didn't feel confining anymore. The next morning was bittersweet. We packed up our bags, preparing to go our separate ways back to reality. On the shuttle to the airport, the silence between us was comfortable, but I could tell we both wanted more. Before we parted, Matt pulled me in for one last hug. This was unexpected, but I'm glad it happened. "Me too," I said honestly. As I watched him walk away, I realized that sometimes the best stories don't come from perfect plans. They come from the unexpected detours, the shared beds, the strangers who become something more. And maybe, just maybe, this was the start of one worth telling. After Matt walked away, I stood there for a long moment, letting the reality sink in. That night, every awkward, unexpected second of it had shifted something inside me. It was insane how quickly you could go from strangers to something that felt like a beginning. I almost missed my shuttle back to Chicago because I was stuck replaying every little moment. Back in Chicago, my routine snapped back fast. Meetings, emails, phone calls, the usual grind. But something was different. My mind kept drifting to the night before, to Matt's laugh, the way his eyes caught the light in that dim jazz bar, the softness in that last kiss. I hadn't expected to feel this way after a one-night detour, but there it was, pulling at me like a quiet undercurrent. I texted him later that day, something simple. "Made it back. Hope your gallery opening went well." I almost didn't send it. Didn't want to seem too eager, but I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. His reply came quicker than I expected. "Thanks. It went better than I hoped. We should keep this accidental thing going, yeah?" That one text opened a door I didn't even know was there. We started messaging more, sharing photos, talking about our days, sending dumb jokes. It was easy, like sliding into a conversation you never wanted to end. We traded stories about our lives beyond the hotel room, the parts we rarely showed anyone else. A week later, I found myself booking a flight back to Chicago. It was impulsive, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a stray connection. Matt met me at the airport with that same laid-back grin, like we were picking up exactly where we left off. We spent the weekend wandering through galleries, trying new foods, and just being around each other without the weird backdrop of a diverted flight hanging over us. The city felt different now, less like a place I had to endure, and more like somewhere I could actually belong. One night, we found ourselves on the rooftop of his apartment building, looking out over the city lights. Matt pulled me close, and I could feel the tension between wanting to hold on and the fear of what that might mean. "I'm not really good at this," he admitted quietly. "At letting people in." I looked up at him, heart pounding. "Neither am I, but maybe we can learn together." He smiled, a little hesitant but hopeful. "Yeah, together sounds good." From that moment, everything began to shift. Our accidental night became a starting point, a story we'd laugh about later, but also something real. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't always easy, but it was ours. Looking back, I realized that sometimes life's detours aren't just interruptions, they're invitations. Invitations to take a chance, to share a bed, to share a story, and maybe, just maybe, to find something unexpected worth holding on to. After that rooftop night, things between Matt and me started slipping into a kind of rhythm I hadn't expected. I was back in New York, he was still in Chicago, but the distance didn't feel so big anymore. Our text conversations turned into late-night phone calls, and phone calls sometimes morphed into video chats that ran way past when we probably should have been asleep. It was surreal how quickly what started as a ridiculous story about a diverted plane and one shared bed transformed into this real, messy, complicated connection. Still, it wasn't all smooth sailing. For one thing, neither of us was great at the whole long-distance thing. I remember one night, about a month after my first trip back to Chicago, when we got into this argument over texts. Silly, stupid stuff. I was stressed from a deadline at work, and Matt was frustrated about a project that wasn't coming together. We both said things we didn't mean. The kind of fight that makes you question if you're actually capable of doing this, whatever this was. I didn't sleep that night. I just stared at the ceiling, wondering if the whole thing was a mistake. But then, the next morning, I got this message from Matt. "I hate fighting with you. Let's figure this out instead of messing it up." That was the moment I realized how much I cared. Enough to want to fight through the hard parts, not just the easy ones. We patched things up slowly. We both learned how to be better at communicating, even when it was uncomfortable. Matt would send me pictures of little things he thought I'd like the giant mural he spotted downtown or a cup of coffee with a heart drawn in the foam, and I'd send back dumb selfies to make him laugh. The distance made every visit feel electric, like we were trying to fit a lifetime into a weekend. A few months later, Matt surprised me by showing up in New York unannounced. I was at the coffee shop near my apartment, killing time between meetings, when he appeared at the door, grinning like a kid who just pulled off the best prank ever. The first thing I noticed was how much more real he felt in person, more than a collection of pixels on my screen. "Got a free weekend," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Thought I'd come see what you're all about." I couldn't stop smiling. Best surprise ever. That weekend was one of the best I'd had in a long time. We wandered around the city, hitting all the spots I usually only showed my closest friends. We ate street food, sat in the park watching the world go by, and somehow found ourselves back at my apartment late at night, talking about everything from childhood fears to our biggest dreams. It wasn't perfect. There were awkward moments when the reality of our different lives felt like it was pressing in on us. But there was also this undeniable connection, this sense that we were both willing to make it work, no matter the odds. One morning, as the sunlight streamed through the window, Matt turned to me and said, "I don't want this to be just weekends and texts anymore." I held his gaze, feeling my own heart pounding. Neither do I. That was when we started talking seriously about what it would mean to close the distance. The logistics, the fears, the excitement. It was overwhelming but also thrilling. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just thinking about what I had to lose. I was thinking about what I stood to gain. Looking back, it's funny how a diverted plane and a cramped hotel room led me here. To someone who challenged me, who made me laugh when I wanted to cry, and who showed me that sometimes the best parts of life come from the most unexpected detours. As I sit here now, typing this out, I'm still amazed at how a random twist of fate brought us together. And even though the road ahead isn't always clear, I'm ready to take it. One step, one day, one shared moment at a time. Months passed, and the idea of closing the distance between us shifted from a vague hope to a concrete plan. Matt found a freelance photography gig in New York, small but steady enough to make the move possible. I helped him find a place not far from my apartment, a cozy little spot with tall windows and exposed brick, a perfect canvas for the kind of life we were starting to paint together. The day Matt moved in, I was there waiting with a couple of pizzas and a half-assembled IKEA bookshelf. It was the kind of messy, imperfect moment that felt exactly right. We spent the evening laughing over missing screws and crooked shelves, The kind of easy companionship that only comes when you've gone through the hard parts and still want to be near each other. That night, sharing the same bed without any awkwardness, I realized how far we'd come from that first accidental night in Milwaukee. Back then, it was just two strangers forced to share a room. Now, it was two people choosing to share their lives. We didn't have some grand declaration or sweeping gesture. There was no perfect sunset or dramatic confession. Instead, there were quiet mornings with coffee brewing, lazy Sunday afternoons tangled up in sheets, and the kind of conversations that stretched into the night, where we talked about everything and nothing all at once. One evening, as we sat on the fire escape watching the city lights flicker to life, Matt reached over and took my hand. "I'm glad we gave this a chance," he said softly. I squeezed his hand, feeling that same calm happiness I'd felt that first night, only deeper now, more settled. Me too. Life's funny like that. The truth is, none of it was perfect, and that's what made it real. We faced challenges, long days, missed calls, the occasional doubt, but we faced them together. That shared bed in that strange hotel was just the start of something neither of us could have planned, but both of us needed. Looking back, I don't see it as a twist of fate or some romantic cliche. It was life, messy and unpredictable, throwing us into a situation that forced us to connect in a way we never expected. And I'm grateful for every awkward moment, every late-night conversation, and every step along the way, because sometimes the best stories don't come from the perfect plan. They come from the unplanned detours, the shared spaces, and the people who show up when you least expect them. And in the end, that's enough to build something real.